On Press Perspective today, we discuss the impact of the recently sealed trade deal between South Korea and the U.S. on the local bourse and more. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Press Perspective. It's August 5th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. We touch upon the South Korea-U.S. trade deal yet again today, with the focus this time on the local economy. For this, I have Steven Borowiec with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Steven, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Nice to be back.
I also have Professor Kim Yong-Jin at Sogang University with the pundit's take on the day's discussion. Professor Kim, as always, it's a pleasure.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here.
Right, we will start here in the studio. Steven, let's begin with the broader, perhaps concerning impact of Mr. Trump's tariffs.
Well, there's a lot going on. We're at an interesting kind of juncture where some major countries have reached deals with the U.S., notably Korea, Japan, Indonesia, a number of others. But if you look around the world, if you look at a lot of major economies, we still have a slated duty of 35% on Canada, 50% for Brazil, 25% for India, 20% for Taiwan, and 39% for that renegade country, Switzerland, of all places. So there's a lot going on. There's a number of moving factors, but one thing that I keep waiting to see the effects of, and that I think we're seeing some effects of now, is how this is all going to affect hiring. It's just because when businesses don't know what's going on, when they're not able to plan things, when they don't know how much they're going to be able to export, how much all of their imported materials are going to cost, when they can't really make these decisions, inevitably they're going to kick the can down the road and delay certain things, and then that means that one of the things that they delay is hiring. And so just recently, the U.S. put out a jobs report that was below expectations, that was pretty lackluster. In Australia's most recent GDP figures, they were lower than expected, and some analysts flagged the uncertainty created by the tariffs as a potential factor hindering hiring. So that's something I've really got my eye on, but it's hard for me not to come away with the impression that the Trump administration is not acting with the economic indicators in mind. They're not really trying to achieve a specific economic outcome. They're really just trying to see however they can benefit in each kind of bilateral deal with each country. The New York Times this week quoted an analyst who described this as a global shakedown of sorts. So here in Korea and across the water in Japan, policymakers kind of touted the agreements they reached as being, achievements of a sort, but they are still facing 15% tariffs, which in the modern era is extremely high, and we don't yet know just how that's going to affect the economy yet in a number of ways in terms of consumer prices, production prices, all kinds of things. So uncertainty still is the order of the day, and I just hope that as we see these countries engage on a bilateral level, that they'll be able to come away with something that, is not just, that has, a broader kind of public interest character in mind, that is not just what can we give to the Trump administration that will benefit a small number of people, but hopefully we can see some measures that will calm the overall economic landscape, something that I think everyone would like to see.
Right, for sure. Professor Kim, as Steven just mentioned, quite a number of critics believe Mr. Trump's tariffs are upending global trade. What are your thoughts?
Well, before we get to the point, I'd like to, mention a couple of bad things happened recently in the United States. So I was surprised to see the numbers of increases in employment and job increases, right? In May, and they adjusted the numbers. In May and in June, the increases in the job, it was 15,000 to 19,000, which were expected about 150,000. And then consumer price increase is 2.6%. That's kind of, the out of, expectation of the FRB. So the signals are kind of giving big warnings to Mr. Trump, I think. And in terms of how Trump tariff are upending the global trade, I mean, but like there are a couple of things to mention. It was a big surprise to see that global trade system which has been built like for a decade has been totally changed in several months after Mr. Trump became the president of the United States. And Mr. Trump redefined what a trade deal means. And so in January, the tariff of the U.S. on the world was 2.5%. Now is over 15% to like 40%. Before the Trump administration, the basic rule which governed the world trade was the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, which means GATT, made in 1947, which evolved into the World Trade Organization, WTO, multilateral agreement, right? Most U.S. administrations of both political parties generally have believed that free trade served the U.S. interest by strengthening trading ties, promoting the economic growth of allies, and delivering cheaper goods at home. Even though this, multilateral, bilateral, later on, right? Bilateral systems were never fully functional. U.S. leaders always viewed it as better than a protectionist alternative. However, Mr. Trump, sees differently, and he is now resetting the global trading system according to his preferences. The rest of the world is adapting very quickly. Like, Stephen mentioned, we'll see what happens furthermore.
Right. And in the meantime, Stephen, with regard to South Korea's trade deal with the U.S., what has been this foreign media reaction to that particular deal?
It's something that foreign media has been quite interested in, I think, because South Korea and some other Asian countries are countries that are kind of particularly vulnerable to these changes in the trading environment because it's an export-led economy and has a major destination. The United States is a major destination for South Korean goods, such as autos, appliances, a number of other things. So you can parse this deal, and there's a few things that it's possible to say about it. I would say that one takeaway, one kind of optimistic way of interpreting it is that at least it provides clarity in the short term. The South Korean government and South Korean firms are able to say that they have 15% tariffs, which are on par with other countries. So that at least means that South Korea is not at a disadvantage vis-a-vis other countries that are exporting the same products or similar products. I know that was a major objective of the South Korean negotiating team. They didn't want to come out of the negotiations with the Trump administration feeling as though they were kind of behind competitor countries. And so now that uncertain, that as I said earlier, there is still some amount of uncertainty, but like now that there is at least clarity on that point, I think the overall economic indicators are expected to be a little more robust going forward. The administration of President Lee Jae-myung here has just enacted a quite sizable stimulus package, and domestic inflation has been moderating, and so we could see a rate cut when the Bank of Korea convenes again later this month. So, all in all, I would say that the picture is more optimistic now than it was, a few weeks ago or a month ago or 2 months ago. And the foreign media coverage has reflected that. It'll now be a matter of just, trying to do actual reporting on the ground and see how companies are moving ahead and seeing how the domestic scenario plays out from here.
Right, indeed. I mean, government officials here as well have also said that the trade deal with the U.S. kind of eases the uncertainties on the export front. And yet, Professor Kim, shares of Korean car makers slumped following news of the country's trade deal with the U.S. How do you explain this market response?
Well, it's kind of understandable, right? Before the deal, Korean automakers enjoyed 0% tariff, when they export their car to the United States, compared to 2.5% of Japan and EU. Due to the FTA free trade agreement between Korea and the U.S. But Japan and EU are not FTA partners with the U.S. And had been subjected to a 2.5% auto tariff, while Korean vehicles had entered the U.S. market tariff-free under the Korea-U.S. FTA. However, under the new agreement between Korea and the U.S., Korean vehicles are now subject to the full 15% tariff, which means Korean car makers will face a heavier effective burden than that faced by Japan and the EU. I mean, they had 12.5% increases in tariff. This part of the risk looked reflected on the stock price of Hyundai Motors and Kia. But we have to really think about this thing from different perspective. With regard to the deal. With regard to the deal, we had to think about two things. First of all, the agreement reduces the uncertainty in the trade for both Hyundai Motors and Samsung, like Steve mentioned, which is good part. So at the economy always like clarity rather than uncertainty, right? This deal may give Samsung to work with Tesla more actively because of the reduced uncertainty. Secondly, the FTA system, which is bilateral system, right, was subject to being gotten rid of when Mr. Trump was elected as the president of the U.S. And that's is kind of destined, right? And the Korean car makers have enough strength enough to overcome that much of cost burden, like 2.5%, right? And they have to absorb that cost into their production system. So I believe the stock price of these companies, will rebound soon in the future.
Right. And staying in the stock market, Bloomberg even claims that global money is chasing the Korean stock market. Could you give us some context behind this outlook by Bloomberg?
Well, I'm sure Professor Kim would know a lot more about this than me, but I'll try my best. Very early in his term, President Lee talked about making some substantive changes to the Commercial Act, and I think to answer the kind of long way of answering why this money is coming into the Korean stock market is Lee and other kind of the liberal side of South Korean politics have long wanted to make changes to the Korean system in a way that would make Jebol owners more responsive to the wishes of minority shareholders, because there's long been what is called the Korea discount. For a well-developed economy, South Korean shares have traded at a kind of lower value than some analysts feel as though their true value is. But the idea, there's been this long-standing impression in place that the big companies are run according to the whims of the family, and they're run according to the decisions of the top brass, and they don't communicate all that effectively, and they don't take into account the wishes of smaller shareholders, and therefore they therefore become less attractive to minority shareholders, and their stock prices reflect that. Their stock prices trade at a kind of lower level. So that's something that I think at least a lot of outside analysts of the South Korean economy have been calling for quite a long time, to see the market run in a way that is less top-down, that is more transparent. And it remains to be seen just how and when the actual granular changes were made. I think the Lee administration wants to increase transparency around the selection of board members and the reduction of treasury stock holdings. And so these are the kind of things that, if you have been reading about the economy for 5 or 10 or 20 years, you can read international assessments by ratings agencies and other kind of impartial international bodies that have been recommending these measures. So I think it's a welcome sign, and the market is responding to that. The stock market is, if anything, a self-interested and a profit-seeking kind of thing. So as Bloomberg points out, if there is this money flooding into the market, it's because investors are feeling better about the Kospi.
Right, and Professor Kim, I extend this next question to you. That was also the headline of an article by the South China Morning Post. Does Seoul's stock market boom signal the end of the Korea discount, Professor Kim?
Answer, yes. as everybody knows, and as Stephen mentioned, the Korean capital market was very dark in its, a future, right? In the end of the last year and before the presidential election, due to the martial law declaration and the following impeachment of the ex-president Yoon, the causes of the Korean discount were not clearly resolved till that time. However, after the new government is established, they are trying to solve those problems, especially the problem related to the ineffective and unclear governance. On July 3rd, Korean Parliament approved the revisions to the country's commercial code, commercial act that make members of the company's management board legally accountable to all shareholders, not to the large shareholders, and limit the voting right to the biggest shareholders to 3% when appointing members of audit committees, so that audit committee has independency. The Parliament is preparing another revision to make the governance more transparent. This reform will resolve a big part of the Korean discount problem. Moreover, the Korean government are willing to support companies for new technology development and innovation by allocating huge resources to AI development and AI transformations, which will boost up the economic growth. So basically, when we want to boost up the stock market, the company's, growth perspective is very, very important. Not only, the dividend and taking care of, shareholders, right? So I believe, the stock market boom of Seoul is signaling at the moment the end of the Korean discount.
Right, good to know, good to know. Another interest, Stephen, for Seoul, of course, is stable coins. But before we touch about the prospects here, could you tell us about the latest with regard to these stable coins over in the U.S.?
Okay, well, here's another topic that I'm not about to write the book on at any point soon, but my understanding of this is it's not quite the legality, like in terms of like making this legal, but it's more like creating a kind of regulatory framework for a stable coin. So like what a stable coin is, in my understanding, is it's a crypto coin that is, to give it some kind of stability in its value, is it's pegged to something like a fiat of a national currency. And so that makes me wonder a number of things, because I've always understood like the appeal of cryptocurrency to be that like it's something that exists independently of regulation. It's something that exists outside of the conventional financial system. So if you start doing things like pegging crypto coins to a national currency, like does it continue to be a cryptocurrency? Does it still have the same kind of appeal? I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable enough of the topic to say, but this is definitely an interesting development, and it's very much in line with what the Trump administration has, their kind of approach to crypto. It's something that they've championed, is something that they've looked to kind of bring further into the mainstream. It's something that they've described as a kind of a result of American entrepreneurialism and a kind of a striving mentality. Crypto was something that I think a lot of people had kind of thought was on the way out several years ago under the Biden administration, and that's all very much changed since Trump came into power. So if this moves forward, I think it will undoubtedly be a big win for the crypto sector, in that it'll be a big source of legitimacy. It'll be the kind of the biggest formal endorsement that crypto has had yet from the U.S. government. But like I said, I would just flag the concerns I raised earlier. If something is a stable coin, does it retain the appeal that cryptocurrency has typically had of being something that is kind of volatile, kind of wild, but ultimately something that will appreciate in value consistently as Bitcoin has over the years? time will tell.
Right, and hopefully Professor Kim will be able to give us a little bit of his thoughts with regard to that once he answers my question first. Professor Kim, what are the prospects of stable coins taking root here in South Korea, do you think?
Well, in terms of stablecoin, the U.S. stablecoins are dominating the market right now. The size might be $2,500 billion. And the 95% of stablecoins is dominated by U.S. stablecoins, what's called USDT and USDC. And Mr. Trump tried to use that stablecoins to secure the U.S. currency dominance over the world. I mean, that's his policy, right? To respond to his, movement. I mean, recently the Genius Act means guiding and establishing national innovation for U.S. Stablecoins Act. That was passed, and then they are preparing. It's reviewing two acts. One is Digital Asset Clarity Act, and then the CBDC is prohibited, for the FRB. So FRB cannot do any kind of things, with regard to stable coins. That's what they do. So with this, initiatives of President Trump, Korea need to respond to those kind of things. So during the presidential campaign, President Lee Jae-myung promised the introduction of the stable coin to Korean economy, and he looks to have a very clear vision about the digital economy, where digital assets, including digital coins and stable coins, play a key role in facilitating online to online, online to offline transactions, right? Recently, lawmaker An Do-gul opened a seminar about the potential law for a stable coin, which is similar to the U.S. Genius Act, like I mentioned, the guiding and establishing national innovation for U.S. stable coin. The proposed bill included items like, who will mint the one-based stable coin, and the criteria, right? How to supervise and monitor the companies, and how to protect customers, and how to regulate them regarding the issues of money laundering and supporting terrorists. And I believe at least by the first half of the next year, stable coins will become legal here in Korea.
Right, I see. All right. I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Professor Kim, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks for having me.
And Steven, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.